So fox whistles are used to mimic a distressed or injured rabbit to lure foxes into range, usually to be shot, but they will work on other canines and felines. So what I'm going to do is compare some of the whistles that are on the market by looking at the volume and the waveform and thus the frequency that they put out, and then compare that back to a real rabbit. So concentrating on those that you can go out and buy, they fall into three categories. And I'll refer to these as the button type, the Tenterfield type, and the reed type. So what I'll do is stand back about 20 metres and measure the volume on a decibel meter and the waveform on the computer. So here I'm just going to blast the whistles for as loud a sound as possible. Okay, so in that sequence I was just blasting the whistles to get a louder sound as possible. Now let's compare the whistles to an actual rabbit. So the button whistles tend to replicate a newborn hairless rabbit. So here's a recording of one followed by the whistles. So the button whistle is probably the most common whistle. It's easily found, easily bought. It's really cheap, but it's also the quietest. You can only use a very soft breath to it, and thus has the least range of all the whistles. But it is tried and true. The Bombala whistle, which is a couple shotgun shells pressed together, shows a 10 decibel increase over the button whistle, which is perceived as a volume increase of about 2 times, so it's twice as loud. But that comes at the cost of how much air you have to blow through it. It's very inefficient. The least efficient of any whistle in this video. The Bourke whistle is probably my favourite of the button type whistles. All it is a 243 case with a couple holes, one in each side, and pressed together with the correct dimensions. It's a little louder than the button type and with a higher frequency or higher pitch, which is a little closer to that newborn rabbit sound, whereas the other two depict a rabbit slightly older. It also includes a reed call, which is fitted where the primer would be, which I'll have a look at later. Now I did bring up frequency, which translates into the pitch of the whistle. So having a look at the pretty crazy ass claims of the Bombala whistle, let's find some facts. I can't find information specific to foxes, but a dog's hearing range will peak around 40 kHz, with the most sensitive range being between 3 and 10 kHz. So yes, wild dogs can hear a higher range than humans, which peaks around 20 kHz. It needs a very high intensity of up around 70 decibels. So 837 kHz is well beyond the range of anything. Nothing's going to hear that frequency. Another thing to note when you're trying to call in something hundreds of metres away is that sound doesn't stay the same over long distances, and this is due to attenuation, so the sound will tend to even out and be dominated by the longer wavelengths. This happens because high frequencies carry more energy and heat up the air more as they move through it. And because the wavelength and the speed is constant under the same conditions, it has to lose something, and thus it loses amplitude. Not only that, but higher frequencies tend to reflect rather than penetrate. So the longer the wavelength, the lower the frequency, the further it will hold its volume. And because these calls aren't producing perfect sine waves, you get a change in the sound, as the high frequencies attenuate faster than the lower ones. Anyway, let's have a listen to the Tenterfield type whistles, which are aiming to replicate that high-pitched scream of a rabbit that's just been caught, it's been eaten, it's in mortal danger. So I wasn't trying to blow with any technique, trying to replicate a rabbit. I was just trying to give a standard blow. So you can easily compare the whistles and see how much whistle, how much rasp, and how much gravel they have in that sound. So as you can see in the second column of waveforms, which is the sound over 80 milliseconds, there's a lot of fluctuations, and that's where the inherent rasp comes from these type of whistles. So for me, the Tenterfield whistle creates the most pure whistle, but it's a bit light on the rasp. And I really struggle with this whistle, and that might be reflected in the relatively low volume I could get out of it compared to the others. On the other hand, the Silva whistle, which I'd regard as the easiest one to use, has a little bit more rasp in the call, which you can see as the irregularities in the waveform of that first column. It also does really well at holding the same sound over the full volume range. The best whistle is another one I struggle with a bit, and I think that might be inherent to the holes being very close to the fold. I prefer them forward a little bit further. The best seems to work better when it's blasted loudly, where it creates a very gravelly call with a lot of grit in it. I have two versions of the Apex whistle. The first version is a very raspy call, where you can change the proportion of the rasp to whistle by directing more or less air up through the bottom hole. It doesn't have the volume of the version 2 Apex though, which I'll swap to now. So the version 2 is the loudest of the commercial whistles that I measured. The version 2 has a good mix of shrill whistle sound combined with a gravelly rasp, and it does a good job of holding that over a good volume range. I included the pipe whistle because it creates a somewhat different sound to the others. It's just an experiment that I did a while ago by making a whistle out of a piece of pipe. It was the loudest of all the whistles, which probably comes at the cost of being more directional. It's also the lowest frequency, so it's going to carry over long distances. It has a more hollow, resonant sound than the other whistles, but I've never tried it out in the field, so I can make no comment about its effectiveness. Anyway, I'll have a word on volume and what decibels actually mean. It's based on a logarithmic scale. So to increase something by 10 decibels, you have to increase the power intensity of the sound wave by 10 times. To increase it by 20 decibels, 100 times. 30 decibels, 1,000 times. So the pipe whistle's delivering about 1,000 times more sound intensity power than the Bourke reed whistle. But how does that relate to the actual perceived volume? Well, as a general rule of thumb, for every 10 decibel increase, you get a doubling of volume. So a 20 decibel increase, 4 times the volume. 30 decibel increase, 8 times the volume. So the pipe whistle will be about 8 times louder than the Bourke reed whistle. It also means that these whistles are pushing the limits of what a whistle can actually do, because the power required is going up by a factor of 10, whereas the perceived loudness is only going up by a factor of 2. So you're getting diminishing returns. Now let's have a listen to the reed calls. When compared to a whining rabbit that's either trapped or otherwise distressed, I'll show both a kitten rabbit and a mature adult rabbit. So reed calls aren't typically used in Australia, and I don't have much experience with them. But I do like the reed call from Best. It's a high-pitched, younger rabbit sound, and you can vary the pitch by varying the pressure that you bite down on it. The Acme rabbit call sounds nothing like a rabbit that I've ever heard. It does sound a little bit more like a hare though. I'm not a big fan of these calls that you have to flap your hand about in front of. And the same goes for the Primos call. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it does sound more like a hare. Supposedly Primos make a double reed call which sounds better than this one. The Bourke whistle again. So it has the whistle as well as the reed call, which I'm pretty sure is just taken out of a squeaky dog toy. But they send dogs mad, so I imagine they'd work on foxes just as well. Anyway, as a thank you for making it to the end of this video, I'm going to give away an Apex fox whistle. All the foxes in this video have been coming into the Apex whistle. I can't guarantee the package will make it anywhere in the world, but it is open to anyone in the world. All you have to do to enter is leave a comment below. First 100 comments go into the draw. So first in, best dressed. What I can guarantee though, guys, is that that's a fine looking t-shirt.